The French state has adopted the unproven claim Russia is in the business of hacking elections. On February 20th, France accused Russia of attempting quote-unquote unacceptable interference in the country's presidential elections. Not surprisingly, the corporate media reports the allegation as a foregone conclusion.
Tonight, new concerns that Vladimir Putin's notorious hacking teams could be trying to influence another election, targeting a key U.S. ally.
The objective is obvious. The French establishment will do anything to make sure Marine Le Pen doesn't win the election. She's opposed to globalization, EU membership, unchecked immigration, and warns of the threat France faces from radical Islam.
Je crois que c'est le grand retour du patriotisme. Or, je pense que la fracture gauche-droite.
This is the great comeback of patriotism. I believe that the left-right division is an illusion. It is an artificial division created to hide the fact that there is another way.
La vraie fracture, le vrai clivage, il est entre les patriotes et les mondialistes.
The real divide is between the patriots and the globalists. I am on the side of patriotism, and many European leaders are on the side of globalization.
Présent encore du côté du mondialisme.
Le Pen's call for a referendum to exit the EU set off alarm bells in Brussels. In response, the media accused Russia of funding Le Pen's National Front Party as part of an effort to disassemble the European Union and undermine the French state.
Marine Le Pen, the head of France's far-right National Front Party, has said she will ask the French people to vote on pulling out of the EU if she is elected president in 2017. The EU exit threat comes in the wake of a strong second-place showing for the far-right National Front in last week's local elections. The anti-EU, anti-immigrant National Front had been widely forecast to sweep up the majority of the votes in the first round of voting last weekend. But the National Front remains embroiled in scandal after allegations that Russia is funding the party with millions of euros per year in an effort to undermine the unity of the European Union.
The ruling elite and its media compare the rise of nationalism in Europe to the rise of Hitler in Germany.
I'd like to begin with you, Judy, and I'd like to begin with a quote from a very interesting and courageous woman. I'm sure she is familiar to you, Beate Klaasfeld. Born here in Germany, born here in Berlin. She's in her 70s now. She's lived a lot of her life in France, and she's made a reputation for herself for hunting down former Nazi war criminals. What she has to say is important, and what she has said about recent developments in France is this: what we are seeing in France, she says, reminds me of the year 1933 in Germany. It's strong stuff. Is she right?
She's not right, but she could be right. And substituting Jews for Muslims, Muslims for Jews, it's becoming very, very worrying. We've seen this, what's happening to the United States. It must be quite shocking to be a Muslim. And now Muslims are being targeted in France, and the Front National is directed against Islam, against a religion. It's very worrying. One hopes that European leaders will not allow this slide into this self-destruction.
A similar technique was used in the United States when it became obvious Donald Trump would pose a serious challenge to Hillary Clinton and the Democrat establishment.
Okay, not to sound too corny, but what makes this country different from countries with dictators in Africa or Stalin or Hitler or any of those countries with dictators and totalitarian leaders is that when they took over, they put their opponents in jail. To hear one presidential candidate say, even if it was a flip comment, which it was, you're going to be in jail, to another presidential candidate on the debate stage in the United States of America, stunning, just stunning.
I am seeing very similar parallels of fascism, and others see this too. The thing that I see in fascism is that you have someone that finds a cause that gains people's trust and sympathy, and then they trust that person. They find a target to attack and use propaganda to make that look legitimate. They find their military and their financial support, and then they're off and going. I'm seeing the criticism of Mexicans and Muslims, the requirement of Muslims to have sign on a registry, and that deeply concerns me.
The French establishment, like the Democrats in America, haven't provided any evidence Russia is attempting to undermine their election. The media in the United States based its conclusion on an unclassified 25-page report produced by the CIA, FBI, and the NSA. More than half the report consists of a recycled critique of RT produced in 2012.
Remember how the intelligence officials don't fully trust their sources? Well, they should, because when it comes to accusing RT of being so closely tied to Russia's foreign policy apparatus that its people head RT departments, their information is almost a decade old. None of these people occupy these posts.
The report claims that anyone who criticizes the establishment or the two-party system in the United States is a dupe or useful idiot for Putin and the Russians. It was used to portray populism in the United States and widespread rejection of the government and its policies as Russian subterfuge.
They did not change any vote tallies or anything of that sort.
Yeah, I'm just
and
talking
we have
about...
we have no way of gauging the impact that certainly the intelligence community can't gauge the impact it had on choices the electorate made. There's no way for us to gauge that.
On the other hand, there is solid evidence the U.S. has hacked elections in other countries, including France. On February 16th, WikiLeaks posted a document taken from leaked CIA tasking orders, which is part of its CIA Vault 7 series. In 2012, the CIA was concerned then French President Nicolas Sarkozy would not be re-elected. Both Sarkozy and his opponents were targeted. The fact he was considered Sarkozy the American did not protect him from CIA espionage.
Specifically, these latest WikiLeaks revelations are shedding light on basically a spying campaign conducted by the CIA in a time slot of as much as 7 months leading up to the presidential elections in 2012 in France. Now, WikiLeaks has released information saying, quote, all major French political parties were targeted for infiltration by the CIA's human and electronic spies in the 7 months leading up to France's 2012 presidential election. And this includes both then President Nicolas Sarkozy and presidential candidate François Hollande, who is certainly president now. All of this while the US and France were expressing these emotions of love and friendship and trust towards each other. Let's take a look.
France is America's oldest ally and one of our strongest. We owe our freedom to each other. Americans and French have stood together for 2 centuries, and I told President Hollande that we will stand united now.
The establishment media cast doubt on the validity of the leak, and an Ecuadorian opposition candidate threatened to have WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange removed from Ecuador's embassy in London. In 2012, Ecuador's foreign minister announced that his country was granting Assange political asylum because of the threat represented by a secret U.S. investigation against him and calls for assassination from American politicians. Spying on Sarkozy and other French politicians isn't an isolated event. Last December, Dov Levin of Carnegie Mellon University produced a database showing the U.S. had attempted to influence elections in other countries 81 times between 1946 and 2000. The estimate doesn't include CIA and State Department engineered coups, including those in Iran, Chile, and Guatemala. The United States Agency for International Development specializes in election interference in foreign nations. It's a collection of U.S. State Department-funded NGOs that establish political networks in target countries and work to undermine their political process and subvert elections. In September 2012, the Russian government closed USAID offices after the organization was accused of meddling in the country's politics. U.S. State Department spokesperson Victoria Nuland responded to the move during a news conference.
But on the larger point, I think I just said that it is regrettable that Russia's taken this decision, first and foremost for the Russian people, because we were strongly supporting them at the level of, as I said yesterday, about $50 million a year on tackling some of these difficult, persistent health, environment, other problems in Russia. And we hope for their sake that their government will now pick up the slack because the problems obviously persist.
Nuland and the State Department were responsible for organizing the coup that overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine. The CIA also has a long track record in regard to influencing and flipping elections, most notoriously with its Operation Gladio and strategy of tension in Europe.
Gladio is the code name for a clandestine operation that, as you indicate, was set up by NATO in conjunction with the CIA in the wake of World War II as the Cold War started to develop. And the official cover of this program was that it was designed as a stay-behind program to fund, train, equip, supply, and otherwise facilitate groups to be ready in the case of a Soviet invasion of Europe. And if that were to happen, basically these groups would be able to resist the Soviet occupation forces while NATO prepared some sort of military response. That was at least the official cover for what was happening. But ultimately what resulted from this was, over the course of the 5 decades of the Cold War, these funds and arms and equipment were going to paramilitary groups and ultranationalist groups that were basically against hardline anti-communists. And this resulted in a number of different operations, events, and outrages that ultimately were blamed on communists as a way of trying to basically cripple the political left in Europe during that period. And perhaps the best known of those outrages and atrocities was the 1980 Bologna bombing, which killed 85 people and wounded 200 more. That was, again, directly linked to this Operation Gladio. It was eventually exposed in the early 1990s in the Italian parliament, and eventually that resulted in an outcry that was supposedly going to kick off a European parliamentary investigation that never actually occurred. But we've been led to believe in a lot of the English language media and in the Western world that this was specifically focused on Europe, and it specifically started and ended with the Cold War. But in fact, as more information continues to come out about it, we start to see that, in fact, the field of operations of Operation Gladio really is global, and that it continues to this current day.
Former FBI translator and founder of the National Security Whistleblowers Coalition, Sibel Edmonds, has documented how the Gladio operation continues to this day under Gladio B, an FBI code name adopted in 1997 to designate collaboration between U.S. intelligence, the Pentagon, and Al-Qaeda.
Now, with the fall of the Soviet Union after 1991, we had the same situation, this time over former Soviet Union states. Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and also the entire region, including Georgia. Who was going to control this? Well, we had the Chinese, with their billions of people and their dependence on energy. We have the semi-weakened Russians, and we had us. So between these three actors in the global chess game, each one had to do his or her own, its own best to take over and have the dominance of this region. The United States was in this position with NATO saying, how can we utilize the language that is on our side, the Turkic language and the Turkic heritage and Islam, to sway them and get them further from Russia and on our side, so that we can turn them into NATO members, put our military base there, and also to dominate their energy, the rich energy resources sector. Well, the plan that was conceived and put in place, which was the continuation of Operation Gladio, original Operation Gladio, was that we would use Islam and we would use language, and we continue the previous Operation Gladio tactics in order to sway these countries, bring them to our side, put them in our camp, put our military bases, etc., which we started doing. Starting in 1996, with the help of the United States, under United States direction, we helped open over 350 mosques in Azerbaijan and other countries in the region. We started putting together some of these NGOs for supposed development or education or human rights or feminism, whatever you want to call it, and we started putting our operatives on the ground in place in those countries.
The CIA began its subversion of foreign governments after the Second World War. Following the implementation of the National Security Act signed by President Truman in 1947, the agency intervened in Italy's 1948 general election. Operation Gladio was a collaboration between the CIA, Britain's MI6, and NATO. It supported right-wing militias, organized crime elements, agents provocateurs, and secret military units. Gladio operated in France, Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, Germany, and Switzerland. Gladio's strategy of tension was designed to portray leftist political groups in Europe as terrorists and frighten the populace into voting for authoritarian governments. In order to carry out this goal, Gladio operatives conducted a number of deadly terrorist attacks that were blamed on leftists and Marxists. In August of 1980, Gladio operatives bombed a train station in Bologna, killing 85 people. Initially blamed on the Red Brigades, it was later discovered that fascist elements within the Italian secret police and the head of the P2 Masonic Lodge were responsible for the terror attack. Other fascist groups were also mobilized and engaged in terror. A convicted Gladio terrorist serving a life sentence for murdering a policeman said the reason for Gladio was simple.
Bisognava attaccare I civili, quello che è il popolo, le donne, i bambini, le persone innocenti e strane ad ogni gioco politico. Per una ragione semplice, perché bisognava obbligare questa gente, l'opinione pubblica italiana, a rivolgersi allo Stato, a rivolgersi al regime per chiedere maggiore sicurezza. Il ruolo della destra d'Italia è stato proprio questo. Si è messa al servizio di apparati di Stato che hanno alimentato una strategia che giustamente è stata definita dell'attenzione.
All of this is virtually unknown to the American people. Historical fact and logical conclusion are omitted from the discussion when the media makes baseless accusations about Russia. The real alternative media continues to cover this topic and many others ignored or glossed over by the establishment media. In response, the establishment is now engaged in a concerted propaganda war and has denounced much of the alternative media as fake news. The truth, however, cannot be long paved over with lies, fabrication, and omission. Increasingly, the American people are realizing the establishment is guilty of many crimes, and this in part has resulted in the election victory of Donald Trump. It remains to be seen if Trump will change the foreign policy of the United States and address the subversion and criminal behavior of the CIA and the so-called intelligence community. In the meantime, the government and its lapdog corporate media will continue to push the lie that Putin and the Russians are determined to sway elections and produce fake news. That is to say, news contrary to what the corporate media puts out in service to the establishment.
For just a small subscription fee, you can become a member of the Newsbud community and help keep this website running. Your subscription will provide you with full community access to exclusive content, including videos and articles from Newsbud's team of experts and analysts, as well as a members-only monthly newsletter from Newsbud's founder, Sibel Edmonds. Sign up today for full access at newsbud.com.